Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Culture Lab. I'm McCrae Williams, and I am the North American lead on the Taylor Assessment. And I'm joined here by my European counterpart, Andreas Fossas. In this Culture Lab, we're going to be talking about assessing for culture contribution. We'll be presenting for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll leave the rest of the time for Q&A. Feel free to add questions as we go. Just know that we're going to get to them at the end of the presentation. Before we start, just want to give some background that we are part of ZRG, and ZRG is a leading multinational talent advisory firm. We have 4 lines of business: executive search, interim, RPO, and consulting. And we come from the consulting group, specifically working on culture. All of the work on the Taylor Assessment came from Walking the Talk, one of the acquisitions of ZRG. Walking the Talk started over 30 years ago by Carolyn Taylor and based on the book Walking the Talk, with the company's mission to make culture doable. For decades, we've been studying culture. We've been conducting business unit, function, and company-wide quantitative and qualitative research within organizations across the world and leveraging our proprietary tools. And through that research, we found that there are 6 archetypes, and through a unique combination of them, represented most of the company cultures around the world. In brief, they are achievement, which really it focuses on results and getting things done. Innovation is all about improving, experimenting, and learning. One team represents behaviors like collaboration and communication, where people first focuses on things like supporting and valuing people. Customer-centric cultures are all about the customer and their needs, where greater good cultures look beyond profit and customers. So a combination of these typically represent different types of companies' cultures. As we've been studying it, we've also found that there was a big gap in the market. There wasn't an assessment tool in the market that would help understand at an individual level a person's impact on culture. So we know, most of us know from experience, either individually through expertise, that each one of us, each person working at a company is having an effect on culture. But how might we capture that accurately? So a tool like that, we figured, could be helpful, if not helpful, just maybe even critical for the recruitment process, to hire a person that either already exhibits key behaviors that are valued in your culture, or that may exhibit behaviors that you want or you're trying to build for your future culture. In terms of future culture, the powerful idea here is that the more people you bring on that already prioritize the natural focus on the behaviors that you're looking for in the future, that will accelerate the journey to the desired culture that you're looking for. And the recruitment is one key lever that you can pull to support and move you faster along your journey towards a desired company culture. But that's not just for recruitment. We saw leadership development and other opportunity areas are levers that you can pull leveraging an assessment like this. So from those ideas was born the tool that we recently developed called the Taylor Assessment. And its answer to how does a single person impact a company's culture through either individual recruitment, leadership development, or team building. But rather than tell you too much about it, let's do a little thought experiment. So in here, if you don't mind, pull out your mobile device, or you can go to menti.com and punch on the code here. And in there, you should see a question, and the question's going to ask you, which of these 6 culture archetypes is strongest represented in your company's culture right now? So think of your company culture, look through the 6 archetypes, pick one that you think best represents your company, and then hit submit on the bottom. We'll give everybody a minute here to go through. Now, what we do know as we go through this, we obviously have people on here for lots of different companies, so it's not necessarily representative of it, but what we want to find is, let's make an assumption that if this audience we're employees of one company. We might say that our culture is best represented by customer centricity and achievement. So you can see how this works if we all kind of represented if we were working for one company. But let's follow along for the second step of the thought experiment. Here you should see another question that pops up, which now says, which of these 6 culture archetypes does your company culture need more of to reach its future objectives? So think about where your company wants to go. Similarly, pick one of them that you think you need most for the future, and then hit submit. And this one's all about what you need for the future. What is the one that you need most for the future? Give everybody a couple more moments to vote. Interesting. So if we, let's say, if we as an audience, we're employees of one company again, we might say our company's culture most needs to focus on one team for the future. So now we have 2 data points. Follow me along for one more piece of the journey. Now you should see a question again, one more question here. Now in this case, it's now which of these 6 culture archetypes do you personally feel that you contribute personally to your company's culture? Which of the 6 culture archetypes do you personally contribute most in your current company, your current company's culture? I'll give everybody a minute here. This is all about you as an individual. How much do you contribute here? Give everybody another minute or so to go through this. So now, even though there's a couple hundred of you on here, so we're going to treat, what if we treat everybody in the audience like a single person? If we said this was one person, we'd say that this one person prioritize and values one team, customer centricity, and maybe a little bit there on people first most. And the idea is that if you had just been hired at a company, this result would begin to paint a picture and give us insight into what contribution that you can make to a company's culture. So if you start thinking about some of the data that we had captured earlier about where we are today, what we need to do, and then we have an individual, we'll start being able to see how will this individual help us contribute to the future culture and land in our current culture. So let's take a look and see what's come up. Are we having some technical issues? Oh, no, we're not. Look at that.
Great. So thanks, McCrae, and hello, everyone. So the graph that we see here combines the results of the 3 polls that we just voted on. So if you allow me to draw your attention to the 2 stars on the screen, you have the gold star and the achievement archetype. And this represents the archetype that our company values and focuses most on right now. It was the first poll that we did. And again, in this case, it's achievement. The purple star there on the right represents the archetype our company culture most needs going forward in the future, right, as per our voting. And just again, remembering that as a thought experiment, we're pretending as if we are all employees of the same company, and this would be the sort of profile that we would get. So again, one team was identified as the archetype most needed for the future. Now, the inverted triangles in gray and colored yellow and purple, those represent our personal scores on each archetype. So it was part of question 3, what we personally contribute most to, or which archetype we contribute most to personally at work. And again, we're pretending that all of our scores on this as well pertain to a single person, right? So it's distributed across the archetype. So what this tells us is how aligned our own preferences and motivations are with the company's current culture, again, represented by the gold star, and with the company's desired culture, represented by the purple star. So we get a sense of culture fit in the present. How closely aligned are we with our company's current culture? and we get a sense of culture contribution in the future, how aligned or how likely we are to role model, advocate possibly, and support our companies to reach the cultures that they want to build. So in this case, as we can see on one team, it has the highest score essentially. That's the archetype that we're most likely to contribute ourselves, but it's also the archetype that we identified as most needed in the future. So in a way, those two pieces are aligned. So if this was an individual that we were hiring, we might say that this person is very likely to contribute to the culture that you're trying to build. If we look at achievement and the score, our personal score there, it's in the midway point, essentially. So again, we may not fit entirely with the achievement archetype, which is the current culture, but we do align very strongly with the future culture. So it is these types of insights that we now capture with the Taylor assessment, but now we do so in a more detailed way that I'll take you through. Okay, so again, with the Taylor assessment, we capture the 6 archetypes, but we also capture 5 sub-behaviors within each of those. And each of these behaviors or sub-behaviors relates to a particular way that we might contribute and or behave at work. So for instance, if we look at achievement there on the left, if we look at those 5 behaviors underneath, results orientation, this is about how likely we are to focus on and be motivated by achieving results and focus on the final results, execution, etc. Commerciality is really about how motivated we are to consider the commercial benefits of activity and to turn opportunities into commercial successes. Accountability, the third one there, is really about following through on our commitments and how motivated we are to do that, and to hold ourselves and others to account when that doesn't happen. Risk mastery is really about the preference for anticipating and mitigating risks, so as to increase reliability. And then finally, we have prioritization there, which is about focusing on what will produce the most important outcomes and how likely we are to say no to requests that may take us away from our objective. So we measure all 30 behaviors in the Taylor assessment with a similar degree of granularity to better understand how a single person is likely to contribute to company culture. So now I want to take you through the assessment itself and what it looks like. And you can see what it looks like there on the right. So it asks a series of questions where you have to rank positive and desirable work-related behaviors against each other. And the aim is really to capture how a person is likely to make trade-offs while they're at work, particularly when under pressure, when there's a tight deadline, or when resources are tight, or when there are other competing commitments at play. Gives us a sense of how a person will prioritize. And we feel that this ranking methodology is one key differentiator that sets the Taylor assessment apart from other tools on the market, partly because it gives people a larger set of options than other tools might to compare and contrast against each other, which allow us to arrive at a sort of behavioral hierarchy that can tell us what a person is more likely to prioritize at work and what they're likely to prioritize less at work. Other differentiators that you see there on the left, we covered, McCrae, I think, covered a couple of them. The first one there is that this assessment was really designed by a group of culture experts who've been focusing exclusively on company culture for the last 30 years. So we do it day in and day out, and we brought all of that experience to bear here with this assessment. The second one, another differentiator, is that the assessment focuses and uses language that's specific to business and the corporate context. It doesn't capture how you are at home, but how you are at work. And this matters because one may prioritize different things at home than they do at work. So therefore, the results that we have with the Taylor assessment are more relevant and directly applicable to the workplace. 3, we've already covered. And 4 is that the assessment covers quite a broad range of behaviors, many of which are on the rise in terms of interest and popular or modern trends, rather. Behaviors such as purpose-led, inclusion, and customer empathy, to name a few. So let's have a look at what the results look like once the person has completed the assessment. Great. So this is a typical results output, and it shows us how a single individual scores against the 6 archetypes and also the 30 different behaviors. I'll just quickly walk you through it. So the high scores that you see there in accountability and achievement, agility and innovation, those represent very high preferences for that behavior. So this person is more likely to prioritize those in blue, essentially, and express them at work. Purples are then medium high, as per the legend there at the top. Pinks are medium lows, and then the yellows represent the low preferences. And these low preference behaviors are those that a person is more likely to sacrifice or let go of, particularly when they're under pressure. And they're likely to favor other behaviors, in this case, the blues, essentially, and purples. So if we were to interpret this very briefly, we might say that this person seems to be highly motivated to be accountable based on their high score on accountability. And they're motivated to hold others to account. They're also likely to be highly receptive to feedback and on the lookout for problems that may require a change of direction, which is represented by agility and innovation. And we could go on from there, interpreting what this person is likely to be motivated by and to prioritize. So now I'm going to bring in one additional layer that we haven't really talked about yet. And we call it the culture profile. So the first step that we take when we work with a client using the Taylor assessment is that we sit down with them to co-create that company's unique culture profile. So essentially, we work with you to select between 4 to 6 of the most important behaviors that either already exist and are strong in your company's current culture, or that are not currently present in the culture, but are aspirational and desired for the future. Or, as you see on screen, it's a mix of both, where we have 4 behaviors that are currently present and strong, and we want to hire for them. And then we have 2 additional behaviors that are desired. So that's where the cultural contribution piece comes in, where we might be hiring someone that can help us move in that direction and act like as a catalyst towards culture transformation, as McCrae pointed out earlier. And of course, we can have all kinds of configurations here. So the culture profile is flexible. The point is that it's relevant, applicable, and currently important for your company. It represents where you're at and the direction where you're going. And once we have that profile, we apply that to the results page that we showed you earlier. It looks like this, which is the framework you just saw. And once we apply the culture profile, it looks like this. In this case, there's 6 behaviors that are part of that profile. 3 of them are in achievement. We call that the primary target archetype. That's the key focus, notified by the yellow star there. Then we have 2 target behaviors in customer centricity. That's designated by a purple star. So that's the secondary focus. And then we have one final one in people first and fairness, as you can see there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, some of these will represent current strengths in the culture right now, while others are aspirational. They're not yet there, but the company wants to build them or embed them in the coming 6 to 12 months. And once we have this culture profile in place, we can use it to assess new hires, current leaders, members within a team, etc. And when we bring an individual's results to bear here on this profile, they look like this. And then we can begin to see which behaviors a person is naturally motivated to express and whether those behaviors are also ones that the company is currently prioritizing, either to ensure a better fit with the current culture or a stronger contribution to future desired culture. So, where might we apply this? And we've already alluded to that, but we'll walk you through a few applications here. The first obvious one is, as we mentioned, is recruitment. You can use the Taylor assessment to assess a slate of candidates against your culture profile and use it as a key input into your decision-making process. In the image on screen, you have 4 candidates represented by the columns and how they scored against the client's culture profile. They're on the left by those 6 behaviors. And in these cases, we also reach out beyond the culture profile to highlight a few behaviors the candidate may be particularly high in or low in that are not part of the culture profile, but that still may be important to you and your assessment of that candidate. And we refer to those as complementary contributions and potential risks here at the bottom. And we include these, again, to better pinpoint exactly how a person is going to contribute to your culture. And it may also lead to greater diversity in hiring, as it can prompt hiring managers to consider other behaviors that they may not conventionally hire for, that still may be of benefit to the company's needs regardless. And finally, we provide personal one-to-one debriefs on request to support candidates or any individuals, for that matter, who have taken the tailored assessment to better understand the results and what they mean. So, McCray, I'll hand it over to you now. This final section.
Great, thank you. We mentioned a bit before, but another application we are using the Taylor Assessment for is in leadership development. And that's dependent on if you're going to be doing a culture transformation or some other big deployment with your leaders. But similar to recruitment, you'd want to understand your target culture. And then leaders can be assessed to understand where they can amplify and role model their behaviors that they're strong on that are aligned with the culture and what gaps they may want to close. So this helps them and supports them in their development and gives an idea about where they need to grow and where they can lead and role model heavier. We've also used the Taylor Assessment and Leadership Development programs along with or instead of 180 and 360s or multi-rater assessments. Multi-rater assessment is really going to tell you how others are, yourself and others, and the gap between how people are perceiving you or someone's behavior, where the Taylor assessment is going to give you insight into what's driving that behavior over time. So you can use them together. What we've also found, though, sometimes I should say, is 180s and 360s or multi-raters in some companies or geographical cultures are not comfortable giving feedback to their supervisors or peers. So that's another place where the Taylor assessment sort of fits in nicely. A third application we're using it for is on team building. The Taylor assessment will allow each team member really to understand each other and what motivates them, each other themselves and each other. So that's really good with a new team or a team that's going through transition. This really helps you understand each other. Then it also we create a team report that shows the team strengths and some blind spots for the development areas for both individuals and teams. So those are how you apply them. I thought I would talk a little bit about some use case scenarios of how it actually goes into market. So one is around high performing teams or top 100, top 50, whatever it is for your organization. When you want to take a group of leaders through a development program, the Taylor assessment fits in really nice in it. In M&As, depending on which side you're on, you can use the Taylor assessment to really understand which leaders are the leaders you want to have or have the best impact. In a JV, for example, we've used it where you're creating a new company and you need to potentially pick a few leaders from each company and you want to understand how that dynamic is going to be, the team set up for the culture of that future organization. And then in succession, we've been using it where we've typically seen a pretty decent job on succession, understanding skills and capabilities necessary for leaders, but not necessarily as much on culture impact and contribution. So those are some use case scenarios about how we're deploying the Taylor assessment in the market with our clients. Lastly, here we wanted to just talk a bit about how the Taylor assessment compares or contributes or works with other assessments that are out there. So before I go too deep into that, we hear quite a bit from companies saying they have too many assessments. And quite frankly, many of them are right. So the first recommendation we usually have is for them to assess their assessments. More often than not, there might be some that are not useful or any longer useful where they were before, or that they kept adding assessments because they couldn't find something that they're missing. So the first thing is assess your assessments, make sure you have the right ones in place. But with regards to the Taylor assessment and how it fits into it, here are some thoughts on how our clients are using it along with or in lieu of other assessments. So the KLIS, or really known as the KF4D, that's how popularly known from Korn Ferry, we found that those who use this, while it does a really good job assessing a leader on their own individual leadership objectives, that is around how accountable they are, their willingness to take action and the such, where the Taylor assessment does a really good job on how a leader is going to impact their team on things like coaching, empowerment, and psychological safety. So they tend to blend really well together. The Gallup Clifton strengths we've worked with, and like the TA, it's not a predictive tool, so it tells you more about how someone's natural style and preferences are than what they are likely to do in certain scenarios. The challenge, or sometimes the challenge, is it's got a very positive spin to it. So risks and development areas are a little bit harder to ascertain. So with the Taylor assessment, those become very clear. The PXT select, that's one that we deploy quite a bit in ZRG and are big fans of. And we find that the Taylor assessment complements it well, where the PXT, it's a cognitive test. So it's going to test you on specific cognitive skills, and it's going to really help you understand how well you are for a role fit, where the Taylor assessment is really about culture contribution. And then the Hogan, the feedback's been so far, while the Hogan does go into behaviors and values, that the Taylor assessment has been really used. The Hogan's challenging to be practical and implementable, where the Taylor assessment, we found it to be really supremely practical and immediately actionable. And then lastly, as I brought up the 180, 360, the multi-rater assessments, because they are important. They get deployed quite a bit. But these ratings, so I said in culture, sometimes we found over time, if you keep using them, they tend to get a positive spin to it. Sometimes they're tied to incentive programs where then you can game the system and get them higher. Other times they've just been around for a while, or culturally, it's just not really comfortable to assess your peers or your supervisors on stuff because you're afraid of retribution. We've also got some clients, for example, in the Middle East, where culturally it's uncomfortable to give that kind of feedback in a 180, 360. So in those scenarios, we found that the Taylor assessment fits in really well, where it still allows you to understand yourself and come up with gaps where you can close the gaps or strengths that you can lead on. Okay, we've talked quite a bit now about the Taylor assessment. We thought we'd get through anything before we go into the question and answer here. So now I'm going to go in. Andreas, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All
Great.
right. So the first question is, how is the co-creation done? I think this is back when when we're creating the target culture profile. I remember this coming in. How do you co-create the target culture profile? And then they added on this person on, is it interviews, surveys?
Sure. Yeah, let's I can go ahead and take that, and you can chime in, McCray, as we go. So Karen, thanks for the question. How's the co-creation done? So typically it's a two-step process. One is that we request and review any existing documents, literature, statements that you may have pertaining to your company's culture. This could also include value statement, mission statement, that kind of information. So we review those, and we create essentially a first draft of the culture profile on our side, that based on all of that, and then we connect with you and a group of selected stakeholders to refine that further. We walk you through the thinking based on what we've done to refine the profile further so it meets your needs. That's the typical route. However, we do have more like half-day workshops where we do a full target culture mapping with your team that you select, which is, again, it's more extensive. So we have a couple of options there.
Right. Thank you. So we have one here that's about, looks like around leadership development. When we share target culture behaviors as part of the recruitment, oh no, this is around recruitment. How confident can you be that people answer the questions honestly and not game the system when they want to respond? In other words, I think they're asking, so if you share the target culture, will they try and respond in a way where they game the system to align to the culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't typically share the target culture behaviors ahead of time, partly for that reason. However, so say you're using the Taylor assessment for recruitment purposes. Everyone takes the assessment, and possibly with a successful candidate, during a one-to-one debrief that we would conduct with them on the results, we could bring that culture profile in as a means of onboarding that candidate into your company's culture, essentially. And they can see very quickly the behaviors that are currently strong in the culture and what you may want to develop. But again, just to answer that question, we don't typically share those ahead of time.
Yeah, and I've worked. I'm working with a bunch with the search people on at CRG, and what I've found is that the ultimate goal is to get somebody in the right place in the right company for both the client, our people who are doing search, and the person who's landing in the job. And the Taylor assessment is really going to help make that happen. So if anybody is like gaming the system, it only has a negative impact on anybody. Is the general theme of it in general. So, but it is pretty complex to game it first time out of the gate, even if you knew what the archetypes were, because of the way the questions are, how many you have. There's 27 questions, 8 responses each time. Very hard to calculate and figure out how to do it. It's quite complex. Okay, so I had one about, can you get certified, and if you're a small or mid-sized company, can you get certified in the Taylor assessment? So I don't mind taking that a little bit. So yes, the question is yes, who certifies. We set up a certification for, it doesn't, size really doesn't matter in that case. Quite frankly, we encourage a lot of our clients, if they're going to keep using it, to be certified on it, because it's cost prohibitive to keep hiring an outside firm to do it. With that said, in certain cases with leadership development, senior leaders, you do want to continue to have some outside objective people when you're doing like the debriefs, but things like administering the survey, coming up with target culture profile, those are things that we've set up some certification processes for. Okay, I've got another one here. Is the culture assessment based on people's intentions or behaviors?
Intentions or behaviors. Got it. I'll take a stab at this one. Yeah, great question. So the way we frame it is the behaviors that you see as part of the results, they represent a set of either preferences or motivations. That's what participants taking the Taylor assessment are asked. So they're asked to rank these based on their order of preference. And the link there is that what people are motivated by, they're more likely to express. So there's the kind of the predictive component. And what we find after doing many of these is that, again, it's the premise here is that every individual has a kind of hidden set of behavioral hierarchy, right? So ways that they are inclined to behave in. And these are more visible when there's pressure, as I mentioned earlier, or when there's a tight deadline, where you see people making trade-offs based on their own internal kind of set of behavioral preferences, if you will. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, and I'll add on it is that it's
Sure.
so very specifically about work, and we find that there
Yeah.
tends to be, so when we give debriefs, that people are surprised by some of them. So if you looked in the greater good area, one of them is sustainability, and quite a few people I'll debrief and say, wow, I'm really surprised that I was low on sustainability. First, I tell them, hey, it's a preference, it's at work. It's not that you're good or bad at sustainability, it's that you are choosing that lower in the context of work than you are all these other things. And when you start seeing that, okay, you know what? At work, you're right. At home, I'm doing all sorts of recycling and I'm really committed to the environment, but at work, I'm not. And that stuff shows up here. Now, some people are consistent how they are at home and how they're not, but this sparses it out. And what we care about most is how are you going to show up at work? So that's some of the dynamics that gets kind of pulled out in here. Okay, I got another one here. This one I'm going to take for the beginning, and Andres, you can riff after me.
Sure.
So this seems to be useful when clients know their culture. How might the Taylor assessment be used to define the culture first? So in other words, so I run into this a few times, and I'll give you 2 different scenarios. One is a company that wants to come up with a new culture. So in other words, they don't want to use all the current stuff now as a way to come up with a target culture. They want to think about what's my future. Or what if you're starting a new company and there is no culture yet? You're trying to come up with something new. So there's different ways to do it. One is you can make it just a conscious choice. Like, this is the type of culture that we want to create because that's what we think we need to meet our business objectives. That's all that culture and strategy link together, is to support each other in achieving the outcome of the business objectives. The other is, so for example, when we have like a new company and they're pulling together a leadership team, I'll ask the leaders to take the assessment themselves and use that so they all understand themselves individually, but then as a context, understand what type of company they want to shape in the future. So there are ways to get at the target culture if you don't have the information, or you want to change your culture in a way that you want to use this hiring or leadership development as the key lever to do that. Do you want to build on that, Andres? What I said
Yeah, I
there?
think you covered it, McCrae. Yeah, I mean, if a client has not, yeah, someone has not done much work at all on their culture, um, we will be able to arrive at a sort of working profile through the Taylor assessment. But in such cases, it may be better to conduct kind of a wider culture assessment of the types we provide to get just a clear, more granular answer, a better sense for what the culture is like and what the future culture may need to be. Yeah, so it really depends on where a company is on in that process of defining culture, I
Right.
think.
This kind of ties into it, so I'll answer it, let you go first, unless you want me to, and then you can tell me. But if the company
Sure.
has inspirational culture goals, how do you prevent organ rejection, antibodies, huh? When a person doesn't necessarily fit with the culture that you have today?
Yeah, I'm reading it as well. That's a great question. And you've mentioned this, the antibodies, right, McCrae? So, so that's why with the culture profile, we we typically include a mix of both current strengths that are in the culture now, which will give us a sense of, again, how so the behaviors that are currently prioritized that will likely be essentially the antibodies or the elements that may reject a person. So for instance, if someone joins an organization that's extremely achievement focused, while the person joining is, say, very one team or people first focused, this is an example, there's going to be a sense of dissonance, possibly discomfort in some cases. We might call it lower culture fit or not very strong culture fit in that case. So we try to capture those key elements that are currently strong in the culture profile, as well as the desired behaviors for the future, right? So again, we try to address both with the culture profile.
And building on that, so what I like is that it allows you now to have this conversation ahead of time. You get to talk about, hey, look, this person might get rejected. The antibodies might resist, but they are all about the future. How do we make sure? Because we're using this for leaders. These are leaders coming in that should be able to have the impact on culture. So this is exactly the conversation that you now have about how is it going to size up with our company now and where we want to go. And if we think there's a risk of that, what things can we put in place so that 6 months down the road, they don't get rejected? So now we have the ability to have that conversation and just made a conscious decision with the candidate, if it is a candidate or leader, about what's the best move here. Okay. Let me see here. Do we have any other questions? There's some in here that I need to, I'm going to have to answer directly around costs. If you reach out to us directly, we can give you some more information about costs. It's not that I don't want to share publicly, but it's that it's on a really case-by-case basis about what you're looking to apply, how it's going to go through your system. Are you looking to certify or just run a certain program? So if you reach out directly, happy to have any conversations about pricing in here. We are confidential so far with about the client examples, but we have a few, so we will be sharing those. Somebody asked about that, but if you reach out directly, we can have conversations and we can put you in touch with companies that are using it. I think we've got everybody covered here, Andreas. Let me just look to our host to make sure if I haven't missed up anything. Okay, yeah,
Right.
okay, I did miss one here. How does the assessment differentiate between culture fit and culture contribution? Like you talked about this a bit, but I think you want to really, they're looking to suss it out a bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just looking for that. Is that in the Q&A or in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat there, sorry.
Chat. Let me just pull it up so I can capture it.
How does the assessment
Okay.
differ?
Well, yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So there are two ways. There are two key ways that we capture both. The first one I've already alluded to or mentioned explicitly is the culture profile, right? So again, when we identify um, the current strengths of the present culture that currently exist, there we're talking about culture fit, right? We're talking about the behaviors that when hiring someone, maybe the 2 to 3 behaviors that you absolutely would want a person to have in order to essentially not be rejected, or that's part of the reason why you may want that. But you want people coming in to just prioritize that naturally, so they don't have a harder time kind of integrating into the culture. So that's more culture fit. Now, when we include behaviors in the profile that are forward looking, that are aspirational, that the culture doesn't yet have, but wants to embed, there we're talking about contribution, culture contribution. The idea there is that a person coming into the company will help the company in however small a way to move the culture in that direction. And in that way, as McCrae mentioned, hiring individuals that represent your future culture can be seen as a lever that can be pulled to accelerate that. And then the other way that we capture culture contribution is with the candidate comparison report that I showed you just a snippet of, where we have complementary contribution and potential risks that go outside of the culture profile to identify a candidate's other strengths and other potential risks to the culture that are not part of the profile. Again, increasing the diversity or the types of candidates that one might consider normally. I hope that answers that question, but there's no.
Great. Okay, I'm getting we're getting the, hey, it's time to cut it off. So I think there's one more slide to show about what to do. Well, oh, sorry, one last question. Fine, I get one more. Thinking of recruiting, where in the selection process is it optimum to use Taylor assessment to avoid advancing skilled candidates too far? So I think, I mean, I know, do you want me to go or do you want to go here?
Why don't you start and I can chime in, Greg?
So what we typically say in the recruiting process is that you want, at any point, you can administer a Taylor assessment. What typically we tell them to do when you're down late stage and you're down to their sort of finalists, their final 2 or 3 candidates. And by that stage, you should be very confident in their role fit, that they can do the job that they need to do and accomplish it. So things, whatever you need to do to accomplish to get you to that point. And then we like to administer the Taylor assessment to start seeing then, now that you have candidates, how would they impact your culture? The target culture profile, we just need to do along that search journey prior to the final candidates being going through and getting a slate debrief for the client, just to make sure we understand what's the target culture profile for this position, and then assessing the candidates against it. How's that, Andreas? Did I get it?
Yeah, that covers it.
Okay.
I think, correct.
All right, we're going to wrap it up here. I think we're going to the next slide. If you need anything, my email address is on here. You can reach out to me. And you can scan this QR code to get any more information. We'll leave it up here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please feel free to reach out if you have any further questions, and we look forward to assessing many and all of you, hopefully.